intentionally calming and boring bedtime story, perfect for falling asleep. Enjoy. For the best experience, I recommend lowering the volume until my voice is just a whisper, barely audible. This will make the journey even more relaxing and soothing. The images on screen are only gentle guides, but the true magic happens when you close your eyes and let your imagination bring the story to life. Support the channel by liking and subscribing. They moved in silence, communicating with hand signals when necessary. Torian led the way, his elven sight piercing the darkness and mist more effectively than his companions could. The pendant the Watcher had given him glowed with a soft, steady light against his chest, seeming to repel the worst of the corruption in their immediate vicinity. As they drew closer to the ruins, the signs of Morathel's influence grew more pronounced. The mist itself appeared sentient, coiling around them in tendrils that probed and retreated when they encountered the pendant's light. Strange sounds echoed through the Valanot, the natural cause of nocturnal creatures, but discordant notes that hurt the mind as much as the ears. Halfway to their destination, Torian raised a hand, signaling a halt. Ahead, a patrol of corrupted men moved along the base of the ridge, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if their bodies were poorly controlled puppets. Their eyes reflected what little light existed with an unnatural gleam, and their skin had the same translucent quality Torian had observed in Arathan's shadow touch wound. 6 of them, he whispered as Arister and Balin crouched beside him, heavily armed but moving without purpose entries rather than searches. "Can we bypass them?" Arister asked, studying the terrain ahead. Torian shook his head, not without leaving the ridge's cover, and beyond them he pointed to where the mist thinned momentarily, revealing more patrols circling the ruins, more of the same in greater numbers. "Then we remove them," Balin said grimly, reaching for Razagbal. "Quietly, if possible." "Wait," Torian cautioned. "Look at their movement pattern. They never stray more than 20 paces from that central point." He indicated where the patrol repeatedly converged before spreading out again. "There's something there, Samethin, they're guarding." Arister narrowed his eyes, focusing on the spot Torian had identified. "A stone," he said after a moment, "carved with symbols similar to those in the binding chamber. An outer ward, perhaps. Part of the original binding ritual," Torian suggested. "Possible," Arister agreed. The accounts mentioned anchor points established beyond the central chamber, extending the binding's influence. "If it's part of the original binding, we should avoid disturbing it," Balin pointed out. "But if Morathil has corrupted it for his own purposes, we need to know which," Torian decided. He unslung the ancient bow from his back, selecting one of the star-glass arrows. "Cover me. I'll approach for a closer look." Before the others could object, he slipped away, moving with the silent grace of his kind. Using the twisted vegetation and uneven terrain for cover, he circled wide around the patrol, approaching the stone from the opposite side. Up close, the corruption was even more evident. The ground around the stone had blackened and cracked, with tendrils of darkness spreading outward like roots. The stone itself, a simple marker, perhaps she'd transformed. Its surface writhed with symbols that shifted and changed as he watched, and a faint humming emanated from within, just at the threshold of hearing. Most disturbing was the effect it had on the corrupted men who guarded it. Each time they approached the stone in their patrol pattern, they seemed to grow more solid, more presenters if drawing strength from its influence. When they moved away, they became slightly more translucent, their movements more erratic. Torian retreated carefully, returning to where Arista and Barlin waited. "It's been corrupted," he reported. "Not an anchor for the binding, but a conduit for Morathal's influence. It strengthens his thralls, extends his reach." "Can it be neutralized?" Barlin asked. "Perhaps," Arista said thoughtfully. "If it channels Morathal's power, destroying it might weaken his control over this area. Or alert him to our presence," Torian cautioned. "He likely already knows we approach," Arista replied. "The book you carry would resonate with the other relics as they draw near. But disrupting this conduit might create confusion we could exploit." After brief deliberation, they agreed on a plan. Barlin produced one of his explosive Chargessa, small package wrapped in oilcloth, with a fuse of dwarf make that would burn without smoke or significant light. "This will shatter the stone," he explained, "but the noise will alert every corrupted creature in the valley. We'll need to move immediately afterward." Torian knocked a starglass arrow to his bow. "I'll eliminate as many of the patrol as possible in the confusion. Aim for the stones, center Thats, where the symbols are most concentrated." They positioned themselves carefully, Bylin with the charge ready, Torian with his bow drawn, and Arista prepared to guard their retreat. At Torian's nod, Balin lit the fuse with a striker from his belt, then hurled the package with dwarven precision. It landed directly beside the corrupted stone, the fuse sparking as it burned down. The explosion, when it came, was more violent than any of them anticipated. The stone didn't merely shatter, it detonated, releasing a shockwave of dark energy that knocked the corrupted patrol off their feet. Torian, despite being braced for impact, felt the blast like a physical blow. The pendant at his throat flared brilliantly, seemingly absorbing or deflecting the worst of the energy. In the chaos that followed, Torian loosed arrow after arrow, each finding its mark with unerring accuracy. The starglass arrowheads flared on impact, and the corrupted men fell without rising again, their bodies dissolving into wisps of darkness that dissipated in the night air. "Move," Balin urged as howls and shrieks rose from all directions. The valley had awakened to their presence. They abandoned stealth for speed, racing along the ridge toward the ruins. Behind them, corrupted creatures converged on the explosion, not just men, but twisted animals and things that defied classification, their forms blending and shifting in the mist. The ruins loomed before them, walls of ancient stone now veined with darkness like infected wounds. The entrance they sought, same one Torian and Arathon had used what seemed a lifetime ago, was visible now, a gaping maw in the base of what had once been a watchtower. But between them and that entrance stood a line of voidwalkers, emaciated figures in ancient armor, their featureless faces turned toward the approaching trio. Unlike the shadow forms Torian had glimpsed in the mirror chamber, these were solid, present, their armor gleaming dully in the faint light. "They've been expecting us," Arista said grimly, drawing his crystal-pummeled sword. "Then let's not disappoint them," Balin replied, a zaggle gleaming in his hands as he charged forward with a dwarven battle cry. The Voidwalkers moved with unnatural speed, converging on Balin with weapons of black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But the dwarf was a whirlwind of controlled fury, as a gale sweeping in deadly arcs that caught the first Voidwalker mid-stride. The enchanted axe bit deep, and the creature emitted a sound like tearing fabric as it dissolved into wisps of darkness. Torian and Arista joined the fray, the ancient bows singing as star-glass arrows found their marks, the elven sword flashing with inner light as it parried and struck. The Voidwalkers fought with cold precision, their movements coordinated as if directed by a single mind. Where physical weapons struck them, they seemed to flow around the impact, reforming instantly. The enchanted weapons of the trio inflicted lasting damage, each blow sending portions of the creatures back to the void from which they had emerged. "The entrance," Torian called as they cut through the line of defenders. Now, while the path is clear, they broke through, racing for the dark opening in the ruins. Behind them, more corrupted creatures poured from the mist, a wave of twisted forms and glinting eyes. Balin, the last to enter, turned at the threshold and hurled another explosive charge into their midst. The detonation bought precious seconds as the entrance partially collapsed, temporarily blocking pursuit. Inside, the ruins were transformed. What had been merely ancient and weathered was now actively decaying, stone crumbling to reveal pulsing darkness beneath, like muscle and sinew exposed through rotting skin. The air was thick with the scent of corruption, the simple decay of natural processes, but something fundamentally wrong, an offense against the proper order of things. "The binding chamber," Torian said, orienting himself in the changed environment. "It should be below, through the passage that opened when we first arrived." They moved cautiously through the ruined hall, weapons ready. No creatures barred their path, but the very structure seemed hostile, walls occasionally bulging inward as if the stone itself sought to crush them. The pendant at Torian's throat glowed steadily brighter as they progressed, creating a sphere of clean light that pushed back the worst of the corruption. They reached the spot where the wall had collapsed during the storm, revealing the hidden passage to the binding chamber. But where before there had been a rough-hewn tunnel, now there was a fully formed staircase spiraling downward, its steps made of the same black stone as the Voidwalker's weapons. "Haze remade it," Arista observed, preparing for his full manifestation. "Then we're not too late," Balin said. He wouldn't bother with preparations if Head already succeeded. They descended the staircase, the corruption growing more intense with each step. The walls pulsed with veins of darkness, and whispers filled the air knot, the singular voice that had haunted Torian from the book, but a chorus of desperate, hungry sounds that clawed at the mind. The staircase ended at an archway that opened into what had been the antechamber. Like everything else, it had transformeth rough stone, now polished to a mirror shine, reflecting distorted images of themselves that moved independently, mocking their expressions and gestures. "Don't look at the reflections," Arista warned. "They're designed to disorient, to weaken resolve." They crossed the antechamber with eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the increasingly frantic movements of their reflections. The door to the binding chamber stood open, no longer the heavy wooden portal banded with iron, but an arch of twisted bone and sinew that pulsed with a sickly light. Beyond it lay their destination and their greatest challenge. The binding chamber had expanded, its dimensions now impossible given the physical constraints of the ruins above. The circular room stretched vast and cavernous, its ceiling lost in darkness overhead. The walls, once polished stone inscribed with constellations, now appeared to be made of some transparent substance through which could be glimpsed a landscape of nightmare void filled with half-formed shapes that pressed against the barrier as if seeking entry. At the chamber's center stood the altar where Arathan lay bound. 4 pillars surrounded it, each bearing one of the relics, the black dagger pulsing with sickly green light, the silver box now open to reveal nothing but darkness within, an ornate frame that might once have held the shattered mirror, now filled with swirling mist, and an empty pedestal clearly meant for the book Torian carried. And standing over Arathon, one hand pressed to the ranger's chest, where darkness visibly spread beneath translucent skin, was Morathile himself. He turned as they entered, void-like eyes fixing on them with terrible recognition. "The bearers of the final key," he said, his voice a harmony of discordant notes that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, right on time. Torian's gaze went to Arathon. The ranger's condition was worse than what they had glimpsed through the farseer. His body had become almost completely transparent, dark veins mapping his entire form, his features blurred as if dissolving into the very air. But his aesthete remained his own, clear and aware despite the agony evident in their depths. "Release him," Torian demanded. The ancient bow raised and aimed at Morathal's heart, where a heart would be in a normal being. Morathal's cracked lips formed what might have been a smile. "Release. There is no release for him now. We are becoming one, he and I. His blood calls to mine, across centuries of separation. The same blood that bound me now frees me. We've come to complete that binding," Arista stated, his sword gleaming in the chamber's strange light. "To send you back to the void where you belong." With what Morathil gestured to the relics arranged around the altar. "The mirror is broken. The dagger and box are mine. And the book," his gaze fixed on Torian's pack, "the book has been whispering to you since you first touched it, has it not? Telling you secrets, offering power, suggesting alternatives to the binding." Torian felt the weight of the book against his back, its whispers suddenly louder, more insistent. He had been fighting its influence for so long that Head almost stopped noticing it bet here. In Morathal's presence, its voice rose to a near scream in his mind. "We have what we need," Balin declared, stepping forward with Azaghal raised. "The will to send you back, creature of void." Morathal's attention shifted to the dwarf, his expression one of mild curiosity. "Ah, Durin's folk, always so confident, so certain of your craft. Did you bring blasting powder to a battle of wills. He made a dismissive gesture, and the chamber trembled slightly. Your explosives won't work here, child of Ula. This place exists half in your world, half in mine. Enough talk, Torian said, drawing the bow to full extension. Step away from Arathon, or what? Morathiel challenged. You'll shoot. Your arrows, impressive as they are, cannot harm me in this chamber. I am its master now. As if to demonstrate, he raised a hand. The walls of the chamber rippled, and from them emerged voidwalkers, not the solid forms they had fought above, but the original shadow creatures, their elongated limbs and featureless faces forming from the very substance of the chamber itself. Hold them, Morathiel commanded, and the voidwalkers surged forward, surrounding the trio but not at a Kingmiri containing, preventing any approach to the altar. Now, Morathiel continued, returning his attention to Arathon, we shall complete what was begun. The final merging requires only one more Elementhe book. Bring it to me, elf, and I may yet spare your friend some of the agony that awaits him. Don't, Arathon gasped, his voice barely audible but unmistakably his own. Don't give him anything. Morathiel's expression hardened. He pressed his hand more firmly against Arathon's chest, and the ranger's body arched in silent agony, darkness spreading visibly beneath his skin. Stop, Torian shouted, the bow still drawn but useless against the barrier of voidwalkers. Bring me the book, Morathiel repeated, or watch him suffer far worse. Torian exchanged glances with Arista and Balin. They had anticipated resistance, but not this level of control over the chamber itself. The contingency ritual required them to position the relics and themselves at specific points around Arathon impossible, while Morathiel commanded the space and voidwalkers blocked their movement. We need a diversion, Arista murmured, his eyes never leaving the voidwalkers that surrounded them. Something to disrupt his concentration. The pendant Torian replied quietly. The Watchers said it contains light from before darkness entered the world. In this chamber, half in the void, it might create a momentary weakness, Arista finished. But you'd need to get closer to the altar. I'll make an opening, Balin promised, shifting his grip on a zaggle. Morathiel watched their whispered conference with apparent amusement. Planning your heroic last stand. How predictable. The free peoples always believe there's a way, a secret weakness, a hidden hope. He shook his head, the crown of iron thorns catching the chamber's sickly light. There is none. Only the void awaits for all of you, for all the world in time. Now, Balin roared suddenly, charging the line of voidwalkers with the zaggle raised high. The enchanted axe struck the nearest shadow creature with devastating force, cleaving through its insubstantial form and disrupting its cohesion. The voidwalker dissolved with a sound like tearing silk, creating a momentary gap in their containment. Torian and Arista moved instantly, the elf darting through the opening while the Rivendell emissary guarded Balin's flank as more voidwalkers converged on the dwarf. Morathiel's expression shifted from amusement to alarm as Torian broke through, racing toward the altar with the ancient bow still in hand. Stop him, he commanded, and the very floor beneath Torian's feet seemed to ripple and grab at his ankles. But the pendant at his throat flared brilliantly, burning away the corruption that sought to entangle him. He reached the altar's edge just as Morathiel raised a hand to strike him down with some dark power. In one fluid motion, Torian ripped the pendant from his neck and hurled it directly at Morathiel's chest. The crystal struck true, embedding itself in the creature's form with a sound like shattering glass. Light exploded outward, the sickly illumination that had filled the chamber, but pure, clean radiance that seemed to strip away layers of corruption wherever it touched. Morathiel screamed, a sound of rage and pain that shook the very foundations of the ruins above. The Voidwalkers surrounding Balin and Arista recoiled, their forms destabilizing in the sudden light. Now, Torian shouted, slinging the bow across his back and reaching for the book. The ritual. Arista and Balin fought their way forward as Morathiel staggered back from the altar, clawing at the pendant embedded in his chest. Where the crystal touched him, his form seemed to unravel, darkness pouring from the wound like smoke. Torian placed the book on its designated pedestal, completing the circle of relics around Arathon. The ranger's eyes found his pain and determination mingled in their depths. "Hurry," Arathon gasped. "Haze still inside me." Arista reached the dagger's pedestal, placing his hands on either side of the relic as the ritual required. Balin did the same with the silver box. Torian returned to the book, completing their triangle around the altar. "Begin the words," Arista instructed, his voice raised over Morathiel's continuing screams and the chaotic dissolution of the Voidwalkers around them. They began to chant in unison, each in the language of their people, Arista in ancient Quenya, Balin in the secret tongue of the dwarves, and Torian in Sindarin. The words of binding, preserved through centuries for this very purpose. The relics responded, their malevolent energies redirected by the ritual's structure. The dagger's runes flared with green fire that coalesced into chains of light wrapping around the altar. The silver box emitted a high, keening note that seemed to stabilize the chamber's dimensions, preventing Morathiel's influence from distorting the space further, and the book's pages began to turn of their own accord. The whispers that had haunted Torian now joining the chant, reluctantly bent to the ritual's purpose. Morathiel, still struggling with the pendant embedded in his chest, turned his void-like eyes toward them with hatred that transcended physical expression. "No," he raged, his form beginning to lose cohesion as the ritual progressed. "I will not be bound again, not after centuries in darkness." He lunged toward the altar, hands outstretched to disrupt the forming bonds. But the chains of light from the dagger lashed out, wrapping around his limbs and holding him back. He fought against them, his strength still formidable despite his wounded state. "The blood," Arista called urgently. "We need the willing sacrifice." Torian looked to Arathon, whose transparent form now pulsed with conflicting, energious darkness of Morathiel's essence and the rituals. Binding force, struggling for dominance. "Arathon," he said, maintaining the chant between words, "your blood must be given willingly, as your ancestor did before." Arathon's eyes cleared momentarily, recognition and resolve shining through the pain. "My knife," he managed. "Belt." Torian saw it, thinner, small dagger still secured at Arathon's waist, overlooked by Morathil, perhaps because it held no magical properties. He reached for it, placing it in Arathon's partially transparent hand. With effort that spoke of immense will, Arathon raised the knife and drew it across his palm. Blood welled in that, the red of healthy life, but a strange mixture of crimson and shadow that captured the chamber's light in disturbing ways. "For the free peoples," Arathon whispered. "For the binding." He pressed his bleeding hand to the altar stone. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The stone drank the blood eagerly, and lines of power etched themselves across its surface, connecting the 4 relics in a complex pattern that pulsed with increasing intensity. Morathil's struggles became desperate, his form fluctuating between solid and vapor as the binding took hold. "You don't understand what you do," he cried, his voice losing its harmonic quality, becoming more singular, more human. "The void is not empty. Things wait. There are things that will find another way in if I am gone. Then they too will be opposed," Balin declared, never breaking the rhythm of the chant. The ritual reached its crescendo, the chamber filling with light that emanated from the altar itself, the pure radiance of the pendant, but something more complex, a weaving of energies from all 3 peoples represented in the binding. The walls stabilized, the glimpses of void beyond fading as reality reasserted itself, and at the center of it all, Arathon's body began to change. The transparency that had claimed him started to reverse, flesh becoming solid again as Morathil's essence was forcibly extracted. A shadow rose from the ranger's chest, a silhouette that approximated Morathil's form but lacked substance, a mere echo of what had nearly manifested. This shadow fought, clawing at Arathon, trying to maintain its hold. But the binding was too strong, the combined will of elf, dwarf, and man focused through relics designed for this very purpose. Inch by inch, the shadow was pulled away, drawn toward the empty frame that had once held the mirror. "The 4th anchor," Arista said, between chanted phrases. "Without the mirror, the binding will be incomplete." "Not incomplete," came a voice from the altar. Arathon, his eyes clear now, though his body still bore the marks of shadow touch, raised his other hand toward the empty frame, redirected. Before any could stop him, he pressed his bleeding palm against the frame's edge. His blood still mixed with shadows flowed along the silver, filling the patterns etched into its surface. The frame began to glow with the same light as the other relics, completing the circuit of power. "What are you doing?" Torian demanded, maintaining the chant, but alarmed by this deviation from the ritual as they understood it. "What must be done?" Arathon replied, his voice stronger now. The Watcher was right. Separation may not be possible without destroying both. Understanding dawned in Torian's eyes. "No," he said. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Arathon said simply. "My blood began this. My blood will end it." The shadow that had been Morathil was now almost completely extracted from Arathon's body, held suspended above the altar by the ritual's power. It writhed and twisted, trying to escape the pull of the empty frame that now functioned as a portal. With a final surge of will, Arathon sat up on the altar, his hands still pressed to the frame. "Complete the binding," he ordered. Now, Arista and Balin, recognizing what Arathon intended, exchanged grim glances but continued the chant, bringing it to its final verses. Torian hesitated, torn between the ritual's completion and the desire to save his friend. "Please," Arathon said, meeting Torian's gaze. "Let me finish what my ancestor began. Let me make this right." In that moment, the Watcher's final words echoed in Torian's memory. "When the moment comes to choose, look not with your eyes, but with your heart." He saw in Arathon not just determination, but Persethi Ranger had made his choice freely, with full knowledge of the cost. With a heart heavy but resolute, Torian completed the chant. The 4 relics flared simultaneously, and the shadow of Morathil was drawn inexorably toward the empty frame. It fought with the last of its strength, its form stretching and distorting as it resisted. "No," it screamed, the voice now fully Morathil's, as he had been in life. "Not again. Not the darkness again." Arathon, still connected to the frame by his bleeding hand, spoke directly to the shadow. "Not alone this time," he said quietly. "I go with you, to ensure you never return." And with those words, he pulled himself from the altar and stepped directly into the frame's empty space. The shadow of Morathil was drawn in with him, their forms merging once more, but this time with Arathon in control, his will dominant as they passed beyond the boundary between worlds. For a brief moment, Arathon's face was visible within the frame, looking back at his companions with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Thank you," he said, his voice already distant, "for everything." Then he was gone, the frame flaring with blinding intensity before going dark and solid. No longer a portal, but a sealed forth anchor, remade through sacrifice. The chamber shuddered once, then began to stabilize. The corruption that had infested the walls receded, stone returning to its natural state. The void walkers that had not been destroyed in the initial burst of light faded away, their connection to this world severed with Morathil's binding. Torian, Arista, and Balin stood in stunned silence around the altar where Arathon had lain. The Ranger was Goninard dead, but somewhere beyond their reach, bound with Morathil in whatever prison the ritual had created. "He knew," Arista said finally. "From the moment we told him separation might not be possible, he knew what he would do." "A warrior's choice," Balin agreed solemnly. "To face the darkness so others need not." Torian said nothing, his gaze fixed on the frame that had become Arathon's prison and tomb. The pendant he had thrown at Morathil lay on the floor nearby, its crystal now dark and lifeless, its purpose fulfilled. "What now?" he asked eventually. "The relics must be separated again," Arista finished. "Placed under guard in different realms, as before. The binding is stronger this time, with Arathon's willing sacrifice, but we cannot risk them ever being brought together again. The dwarves will take the box," Balin declared, "deep into the earth, where none will find it. Rivendell will safeguard the frame, Arista said. "Behind wards and protections that will last as long as elves remain in Tyrena. The woodland realm will keep the dagger," Torian decided. "And the book," he hesitated, feeling its whispers still at the edge of his consciousness. "The book should go to the Silent Watchers, to be studied and contained." They gathered the relics carefully, each taking their designated item. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Torian paused, looking back at the altar where so much had been lost and gained. "He was the best of us," he said quietly. "A man who barely knew me, yet sacrificed everything." "Not everything," Arista corrected gently. "He kept his choice, his honor. In the end, that is what separates us from the darkness we fight." They ascended the staircase, which had reverted to its original rough-hewn state. The ruins above were quiet now, the corrupted creatures gone or fled with the breaking of Moraphal's influence. Outside, dawn approached, the first light of a new day touching the eastern horizon. The valley itself was beginning to heal, corruption receding from the land like a tide pulling back to reveal damaged but resilient shores. It would take time for nature to fully reclaim what had been tainted, but the process had begun. "We should go our separate ways now," Arista suggested. "The relics must be taken to their designated sanctuaries without delay." Balin nodded agreement. "The deep forge lies east. I will return there, then journey with a proper guard to the deeper halls where the box will be secured." "I travel west, to Rivendell," Arista said. "Lord Elrond must be informed of all that has transpired here." Torian looked northward, toward the distant eaves of Shadowgrove. "And I return to the woodland realm, bearing one burden and sending another to the Silent Watchers." They parted with the formal words of their respective peoples, premises, to remember this day, this alliance, this sacrifice. But as Torian began his long journey home, the dagger secured in his pack and the book's whispers a constant companion, he found himself thinking not of the ritual or the relics, but of Arathon, a man he had initially distrusted, whose courage had proven greater than any he had witnessed in 3 centuries of life. A Starblood Ranger who had chosen imprisonment in darkness to save a world that would never know his name. "I will remember," Torian promised the dawn sky. "And I will tell your story, so others remember too. Somewhere beyond the boundaries of the world, in a place between reality and void, he hoped Arathon could hear him." 3 months had passed since the binding ritual. 3 months since Arathon had stepped into the void, taking Morathil with him to ensure the ancient evil remained imprisoned. The corrupted lands around the ruins had begun to heal. Green shoots pushing through blackened soil, wildlife cautiously returning to territories they had abandoned. But the shadow of those events stretched far beyond the isolated valley. Torian stood at the edge of a clearing in the northern reaches of Shadowgrove, the black dagger secured in a specially crafted sheath at his hip. He had returned to the woodland realm as promised, delivering the relic into King Elrond's keeping. The Elven King had received his report with grave concern, immediately ordering the construction of a warded vault deep within the caverns of his hall. Yet even secured behind elven magic and solid stone, the dagger's influence persisted. dreams troubled those who dwelt near, be visions of shadow and void that left even the most stalwart elves uneasy. Whispers of strange sightings reached the king's ears. Twisted creatures glimpsed between the trees at twilight. Patches of forest where birds fell silent and plants withered without cause. Which was why Torian now found himself far from the king's halls, tracking something that should not exist in these woods. Anything? Asked Nimrodel, a fellow scout who had joined him on this mission. Unlike Torian, she had not witnessed the events at the ruins, but she had seen enough in recent weeks to understand the gravity of their task. The trail continues north, Torian replied, kneeling to examine marks in the soft earth. Not footprints, exactly, more like impressions where something heavy had pressed the ground, spaced at irregular intervals. Whatever it is, it's not natural to these woods. The Border Patrol reported 3 missing last week. Nimrodel reminded him. Found only their weapons, covered in some black residue. Torian nodded grimly. The pattern was becoming familiar. Dispersion, abandoned equipment coated in a substance that resembled the ichor of the Voidwalkers, and always these strange markings leading northward. They continued tracking in silence, moving with the soundless grace of woodland elves. The forest grew denser, older, the trees more gnarled, and the undergrowth more tangled. Few elves ventured this far north, where Shadowgrove began to earn its name more thoroughly, shadows deepening even at midday. The trail led them to a ravine cut by a stream that flowed down from the grey mountains. Here, the markings disappeared at the water's edge. Torian scanned the opposite bank, but saw no sign of their quarry's passage. It could have followed the stream, Nimrodel suggested, or she didn't need to finish the thought. They had both noticed how the water itself seemed wrong, slightly darker than it should be, its surface oddly still despite the slope it traversed. Torian knelt and dipped his fingers cautiously into the stream. The water felt thick, almost viscous, and colder than it should be in late summer. When he withdrew his hand, a thin film clung to his skin, reluctant to drip away. Corruption, he said quietly, wiping his hand clean on a patch of moss, like what we saw in the Western Valley, but subtler. Earlier stage, perhaps, from the dagger. Nimrodel asked, her hand moving unconsciously to the bow slung across her back. I don't think so, Torian replied, studying the stream's course as it wound through the ravine. The vault's wards contain its influence. This is something else in Methan that followed me back, or was already here, awakened by recent events. A sound from upstream drew their attention loud, but distinctly out of place in the forest's natural chorus. A soft, wet slithering, like something massive dragging itself over damp stone. They moved toward it with weapons ready. Torian with the ancient bow he had carried since the Silent Watchers. Nimrodel with her own finely crafted elven bow. The ravine narrowed as they progressed, its walls rising higher on either side, limiting their options for retreat if necessary. The stream's corruption grew more pronounced the further upstream they traveled. The water darkened to an inky black, and plants along its banks had withered or transformed. Their natural shapes twisted into configurations that mimicked bones and sinew. The air grew colder, carrying a scent like wet ashes and something metallic. They rounded a bend in the ravine and stopped abruptly. Before them, the stream emerged from a cave mouth in the ravine wall, a perfect arch that appeared too regular to be natural. Black water flowed from its depths, and the slithering sound echoed from within, now accompanied by a rhythmic pulsing, like a massive heartbeat. "No records mention a cave system here," Nimrodel whispered, her keen eyes studying the unnaturally perfect entrance. "Because there wasn't one," Torian replied grimly. "Not until recently." The evidence was clear in the freshly exposed rock around the arch, in the debris still scattered at its base. This opening had been created within the past few months, since his return from the binding ritual. "We should report this to the king," Nimrodel suggested, unease evident in her voice despite her warrior's composure. "Return with a larger force." Torian considered this. Protocol would indeed demand they return with reinforcements before exploring an unknown cave system, especially one so obviously tainted by corruption. Yet something told him delay would only allow whatever dwelled within to grow stronger. "You return," he decided. "I'll remain to observe. If anything emerges, we need to know what we're facing." Nimrodel looked as if she might object, but years of working together had built trust between them. She nodded reluctantly. 3 hours. If you haven't returned to the rendezvous point by then, I bring back a war party." Agreed. She departed with the silent efficiency that made woodland scouts so effective, leaving Torian alone at the cave mouth. He found a position on a ledge above the entrance, partially concealed by the twisted remains of what had once been a healthy oak. From here, he could observe without being immediately detected by anything emerging from the darkness. Time passed slowly. The slithering sounds continued intermittently, sometimes accompanied by a deeper rumbling that vibrated through the stone beneath him. Twice he glimpsed movement in the cave's depths, something large shifting in darkness, its form indistinct, but suggesting multiple limbs moving with unsettling coordination. Near the end of his self-appointed watch, the quality of the sounds changed. The slithering grew louder, more purposeful, approaching the entrance rather than moving randomly within. Torian knocked an arrow to his bow, the starglass arrowhead gleaming faintly in the dimming light of late afternoon. What emerged from the cave was not what he had expected. A figure stumbled into the Daylithomonoid, bipedal, but moving with the jerky, uncoordinated motions he recognized from the corrupted men who had served Morathiel. This one wore the tattered remains of elven scouting leathers, and with a shock of recognition, Torian identified him as Larian. One of the border patrol reported missing the previous week, but Larian had changed. His once fair skin had turned grey and translucent, dark veins visible beneath like a map of corruption. His eyes, when he raised his face toward the sky, reflected light with the same unnatural gleam as the thralls they had encountered in the Western Valley. And most disturbing of all, something moved beneath his skin shadows, shifting and pulsing as if his body contained more than just his own essence. Behind Larian came another figure, and then a third, other missing scouts, similarly transformed. They moved in perfect unison despite their jerky gait, spreading out from the cave entrance with purpose. Torian remained motionless, though every instinct urged him to either flee or attack. These had been his kin, fellow warriors of the woodland realm. Now they were something else, vessels for a corruption he had hoped was contained with Morathil's binding. The corrupted scouts paused, heads tilting as if listening to some inaudible command. Then, with the same unnatural synchronization, they began to move northward, following the ravine away from the heart of elven territory. Torian waited until they had disappeared from view before descending from his perch. The cave entrance beckoned, dark and forbidding, but he resisted its pull. Whatever had transformed his fellow scouts likely still dwelled within, and facing it alone would be foolhardy at best, suicidal at worst. He turned to follow Nimrodel back to their rendezvous point, mind racing with implications. The corruption had not been contained. It had found another vector, another expression, and if it could transform elves beings naturally resistant to shadow and corruption, then no one in Tyrana was truly safe. As he moved swiftly through the forest, a new sound reached his ears, the distinctive horn call of the woodland realm's war parties. Nimrodel had not waited the full 3 hours. She had summoned reinforcements immediately, perhaps sensing the same urgency that now drove Torian's steps. He altered course to intercept them, finding a group of 20 warriors led by Nimrodel herself, accompanied by Gallian, the king's seneschal, and one of his most trusted advisors. Gallian greeted him with evident relief. Nimrodel feared the worst when she reported this corruption. "The worst is yet to come," Torian replied grimly. "I found our missing scouts, sir. What remains of them? They've been transformed, corrupted like the thralls of Morathil, and whatever changed them still dwells in a cave upstream." Gallian's expression hardened. "Show us." They approached the cave with appropriate caution, warriors spreading out to secure the area, while Torian briefed Gallian and the war party's captain on what he had witnessed. The corrupted stream had darkened further in his absence, now resembling liquid shadow more than water, and the pulsing sound from within the cave had grown louder, more insistent. "We should collapse the entrance," the captain suggested. "Seal whatever dwells within, and if there are more of our people inside." Nimrodel countered. "More missing scouts we don't yet know about." "There's another concern," Torian added. "If this corruption has already spread to the stream, sealing the cave may not contain it. We need to understand what we're facing, find its source." Gallian considered this, his ancient eyes troubled. The king suspected something like this might occur. The relics were separated for good reason. It alone is dangerous, but containable. Yet their influence lingers, creates echoes. "Echoes?" Torian questioned. "Impressions left on the world," Gallian explained. "Like a stone thrown into a pond. The stone may sink to the bottom, but the ripples continue outward." He gestured to the corrupted stream. "This is such a ripple, emanating from your contact with the relics, from the binding ritual itself." "Then how do we stop it?" the captain asked. "If it's an echo of something already contained." "We find its heart," Gallian replied. These echoes manifest physicalia, corruption given form, a fragment of the original evil that finds purchase in our world. Destroy that manifestation, and the echo fades. Torian thought of the pulsing sound from within the cave, like a massive heartbeat. I believe I know where to find this heart. They prepared for entry into the cave, distributing enchanted torches that burned with a clear white flame resistant to shadow magic. Warriors checked weapons and armor, while those with knowledge of healing prepared poultices of athelas and other herbs known to counter corruption. Remember, Galleon instructed as they assembled at the cave mouth, we seek the source. Engage corrupted creatures only if necessary. And if you find more of our missing kin, he hesitated, his expression grave. Judge their condition carefully. Some transformations cannot be undone. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. They might be forced to end the suffering of their own people if corruption had claimed them too thoroughly. They entered the cave in formation, torches held high to push back the oppressive darkness. The passage descended steeply, its walls the same unnaturally perfect arch as the entrance, as if something had bored through solid rock with impossible precision. The corrupted stream ran along a channel in the floor, occasionally spreading into pools where darkness seemed to gather more densely. The air grew colder as they descended, carrying that same scent of wet ashes and metal, now mixed with something organic, smell of growth and decay happening too rapidly. Life processes accelerated and twisted. The pulsing sound grew louder, reverberating through the stone around them. It set a rhythm that seemed to pull at their minds, attempting to synchronize their thoughts and movements to its beat. Torian felt the pendant the Watcher had given him no dark and dormant since its use against Morathal grow warm against his chest, as if responding to the corruption's presence. They had travelled perhaps half a league into the earth when the passage opened into a vast chamber that defied all expectations. Its ceiling soared high above, lost in darkness despite their torches. The walls curved in a perfect circle, their surface not stone but something that resembled membrane more than rock, pulsing slightly with the same rhythm they had been following. And at the chamber's center, suspended above a pool of the black, corrupted water, hung what could only be described as a harder, massive, organ-like structure that contracted and expanded with each pulse, pumping darkness through vein-like channels that spread across the chamber's walls and floor. Around this grotesque heart moved corrupted creatures of various forms, more elves like those Torian had seen emerge, but also animals twisted beyond recognition, their bodies partially dissolved and reformed into configurations that served the heart's needs. They tended to the veins, adjusted the flow of corruption, maintained the unnatural ecosystem that had formed in this impossible space. By the Valar, whispered Nimrodel, her composure finally cracking at the sight. What is this place? An echo chamber, Galleon replied, his voice tight with controlled horror. A physical manifestation of the corruption's influence. The heart is its anchor in our world. Torian studied the scene, noting how the corrupted beings moved with purpose, but without true awareness, like extensions of the heart itself rather than independent creatures. How do we destroy it? Fire would be my first choice, the captain suggested. Purifying flame to burn away corruption. No, Galleon countered. Fire might spread the corruption through smoke and ash. We need something more precise. He turned to Torian. The starglass arrows you carried proved effective against void walkers, did they not? Torian nodded, reaching for his quiver. They contain light that harms creatures of shadow. But I have only 5 remaining. Make them count, Galleon said. Aim for the heart itself. The rest of us will hold back the corrupted ones. They spread out along the chamber's edge, warriors forming a protective line, while Torian sought a position with a clear shot at the pulsing heart. The corrupted beings had not yet noticed their presence, focused entirely on their tasks around the central organ. Torian knocked the first starglass arrow, drawing the ancient bow to full extension. He sighted carefully, accounting for the heart's rhythmic movement, then released. The arrow flew true, its crystal head flaring brilliantly as it pierced the heart's outer membrane. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The heart convulsed, a sound like 1,000 screams emanating from it, though it had no mouth. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, and the corrupted beings throughout the chamber froze momentarily before turning as one toward the intruders, their movements now frantic and aggressive. Hold the line, the captain shouted as corrupted elves and twisted animals charged toward them. The warriors of the woodland realm met them with grim determination, blades flashing in the torchlight. Torian knocked a second arrow, forcing himself to focus on the heart rather than the battle erupting around him. This shot struck near the first, widening the wound. The heart's contractions became erratic, the flow of corruption through the veins sputtering and surging unpredictably. The chamber itself began to react, the membrane-like walls contracting and rippling as if in pain. Sections bulged outward before collapsing inward, the perfect circle deforming as the heart's control weakened. Torian's third and fourth arrows struck in quick succession, each causing further convulsions and more structural instability in the chamber. The corrupted beings fought with increasing desperation, but also with less coordination, their movements becoming jerky and random as the heart's influence faltered. For his final shot, Torian aimed at what appeared to be a central node within the heart, visible now through the wounds his previous arrows had created. He drew the bow, feeling the ancient wood flex with power, and released. The starglass arrowhead struck the node and detonated in a burst of pure light that momentarily blinded everyone in the chamber. When vision returned, the heart was rupturing, black ichor pouring from multiple breaches in its structure. The corrupted beings collapsed like puppets with cut strings, their bodies beginning to dissolve into the same dark fluid that had animated them. Fall back, Galleon ordered, as the chamber's walls began to collapse. The whole structure is failing. They retreated up the passage they had entered through, carrying their wounded. Behind them, the sounds of destruction grew louder, stone cracking, fluid rushing, and beneath it all, a dying pulse that grew fainter with each beat. They emerged from the cave as twilight fell over the forest. No sooner had the last warrior cleared the entrance then the arch collapsed, tons of rock falling to seal whatever remained below. The corrupted stream had already begun to clear, its waters running clean again as the source of pollution was destroyed. "Will that be the end of it?" Nimrodel asked as they bound wounds and accounted for their numbers. They had lost 3 warriors in the battle, with several more injured but expected to recover. "For this manifestation, yes," Galleon replied, "but there will be others. The echoes of such powerful relics do not fade quickly or completely." Torian thought of the black dagger secured in its vault beneath the Elven King's halls, of the book now hidden in the silent watches, of the silver box taken deep into dwarven strongholds, and of the frame that held Arathon and Morathil imprisoned between worlds. Each relic an anchor for ancient power, each a potential source of new corruption if not properly contained. "We should warn the other guardians," he suggested. "The dwarves of the Deep Forge, the keepers of the Silent Watchers, Lord Elrond in Rivendell. If similar manifestations appear near the other relics, the king has already sent messengers," Galleon assured him. "But your experience with the relics makes you uniquely qualified to help address these echoes, which is why he has a new assignment for you." Torian raised an eyebrow in question. "You are to travel to each of the relics in turn, ensuring their containment remains secure and addressing any echoes that may have formed," Galleon explained. "Beginning with Rivendell, where the frame is kept, the implications were clear. Months or years of travel, of confronting corruptions similar to what they had just destroyed, of ensuring the sacrifices made to bind Morathel had not been in vain. It was a lonely path, but one Torian knew he must walk. "When do I leave?" he asked simply. "As soon as you're prepared," Galleon replied. "The king fears these echoes may be growing stronger, not weaker, with time. Something stirs in the world, something that resonates with the relic's power." As they made their way back through the darkening forest, Torian felt the weight of this new responsibility settle upon him. He had believed their victory at the binding ritual was an ender conclusion to the darkness they had confronted. Now he understood it had been merely the beginning of a longer struggle. The echoes of Morathel's power continued to ripple outward, finding new expressions in a world increasingly susceptible to shadow. And somewhere beyond the boundaries of reality, Arathon remained, holding the line against a darkness that sought any path back to the world of light. "I will not let your sacrifice be in vain," Torian promised silently as he looked toward the distant mountains he would soon cross. "Whatever echoes remain, I will find them. I will end them." The stars emerged overhead, bright points of light in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow he would begin his journey to Rivendell to ensure the frame's containment remained secure, and after that, wherever the echoes of shadow led him, the battle continued in new forms and on new fronts. But the determination that drove it remained the same: to keep the darkness bound, whatever the cost. The journey to Rivendell took Torian through lands increasingly troubled by shadow. Villages he passed bore signs of uneasy doors, marked with protective symbols, fields left untended at their edges, and everywhere tales of strange sightings in the wild places between settlements. The common folk might not know of Morathil or the Relics, but they sensed the change in the world around them. Autumn had fully claimed the landscape by the time Torian crossed the ford of Bruinen, the river running high with recent rains. The valley of Imladris opened before him, a haven of peace, seemingly untouched by the corruption he had witnessed elsewhere. Waterfalls cascaded down sheer cliffs, their mist catching rainbows in the late afternoon sun. The last homely house stood serene among ancient trees whose leaves turned gold and crimson with the season. Yet even here, Torian sensed something amiss. The elven sentries who greeted him were more numerous than custom dictated, their manner alert rather than welcoming. They escorted him not to the main house, but to a smaller structure set apart from the others. Built against the valley wall, where a waterfall provided constant sound to mask conversation. Erister awaited him there, the Rivendell emissary's ageless face bearing new lines of concern. Torian, he greeted, clasping forearms in the warrior's welcome. Your arrival is timely. We have matters to discuss. The chamber within was sparsely furnished but comfortable, with a hearth providing warmth against the autumn chill. Maps covered one wall, marked with symbols in red and black ink locations of disturbances. Torian guessed, similar to what he had tracked in Shadowgrove. The echoes have reached Rivendell as well, he observed. Not a question, but a confirmation. Arister nodded grimly. Not within the valley itself, Lord Elrond's power still holds firm here. But in the lands around us, yes. Travelers speak of shadows that move against the wind, of streams that run black under moonlight, of dreams filled with whispers from the void. The same patterns we've seen near Shadowgrove, Torian confirmed, centered around the Dagger's vault. We've already confronted one major manifestation of corruption that had taken physical form, claiming our own people as vessels. We've experienced similar losses, Aristo admitted, his expression darkening. 3 of our scouts disappeared in the hills north of here. When found, they were changed, beyond recovery. The implication was clear. The corrupted elves had been given mercy rather than allowed to continue as vessels for darkness. A necessary but painful choice. The frame, Torian asked, returning to his primary purpose. Secure, but not silent, Arister replied. He moved to a tapestry hanging on the far wall, pulling it aside to reveal a hidden door. Lord Elrond keeps it in a specially constructed chamber beneath the falls. Few know of its existence, fewer still have access. The door opened to a narrow staircase carved into living rock, descending steeply into darkness. Arister took a crystal lamp from a niche in the wall, its light steady and silver-white as they descended. The sound of the waterfall grew louder, reverberating through the stone around them. The water's constant flow disrupts the frame's influence, Arister explained as they reached the bottom of the stairs. Moving water has power against shadow magic. It represents change, renewal, life in constant motion. The opposite of the stagnation corruption brings. They stood before another door, this one made of silver, inlaid with patterns of flowing water. Arister placed his palm against its center, speaking words in ancient Quenya that caused the patterns to glow briefly before the door swung inward. The chamber beyond was circular, its walls lined with niches containing crystals similar to those Torian had seen in the Silent Watchers. Water flowed down channels in the walls, gathering in a circular pool that surrounded a raised platform at the center. And upon that platform, secured in a stand of mithril and crystal, stood the frame. It appeared much as it had when Arathon stepped into Ita, simple rectangle of silver, now solid black where once it had been empty space. Its surface rippled occasionally, like water disturbed by a breeze, though the air in the chamber was perfectly still. It changes, Arista said quietly. Sometimes it shows glimpses landscapes of nightmare, or faces contorted in silent screams. And sometimes he hesitated. Sometimes we see him, Arathan, still fighting, still containing what was bound with him. Torian approached the platform, stopping at the edge of the water pool. Even from this distance, he could feel the frame's poera, cold pressure against his mind, like standing at the edge of a great depth and feeling the urge to jump. "Has anyone tried to communicate with him?" he asked. "Lord Elrond attempted it once," Arista replied, using methods similar to the Farseers. The result was concerning. The contact weakened the binding temporarily, allowing something else to reach through, not Morathile himself, but one of his servants. It took 3 days to repair the damage to the chamber's wards. Torian studied the frame more closely, noting how the water in the pool seemed to flow toward it rather than in a natural circular pattern. "It draws power," he observed, "constantly testing its boundaries. Yes, which is why we maintain a guardian at all times." Arista gestured to a figure Torian hadn't noticed, Beforian elf seated in a niche opposite the entrance, so still he might have been carved from the same stone as the chamber. "Linda has been watching today. Others rotate the duty, never the same person for more than a day at a time. The frame's influence grows stronger the longer one is exposed to it." The guardian Lindarachna ledged them with the slightest nod, but did not speak or shift his gaze from the frame. His eyes reflected the silver light of the crystals, giving him an otherworldly appearance. "What have you observed?" Torian asked him directly. Lindire's voice, when he finally spoke, was soft but clear, carrying easily over the sound of flowing water. "It dreams," he said. "Not sleep as we know it, but cycles of activity, sometimes quiet, sometimes raging. Today it has been mostly quiet, with occasional ripples when the wind changes above. The frame responds to conditions outside the chamber." Torian asked, surprised. "2 changes in the natural world," Lindor clarified. "Sunrise, sunset, storms, the phases of the moon. As if it remembers being part of our reality and strains toward those rhythms. Or as if what's contained within it reaches for familiar patterns," Arista suggested. "Morathil was once a man of numeral, a prince who walked under the same sun and moon as we do. Perhaps some fragment of that memory remains." "And Arathan?" Torian asked. "Have you seen him today?" Lindire's expression softened slightly. "Briefly, at dawn." His face appeared for just a moment wary but resolute. He seemed to be speaking, though no sound came through. The thought of Arathon still conscious, still fighting after months imprisoned with an ancient evil, sent a pang through Torian's heart. The ranger's sacrifice had been made willingly, but that made it no less terrible to contemplate. Lord Elrond believes Erethan's presence is what keeps the binding stable, Arista said, as if reading Torian's thoughts. His will, his bloodline connection form a living anchor that Morethil cannot break. Without him, the binding would have failed within days. Then we owe him more than we can ever repay, Torian said quietly. They observed the frame in silence for some time, watching its surface ripple and shift like dark water. Occasionally, patterns formed suggestions of faces or landscapes that appeared and dissolved too quickly to identify clearly. The water in the pool responded to these changes, flowing faster or slower, its surface reflecting the frame's disturbances. There's something else you should see, Arista said finally, breaking the contemplative silence. Something we discovered only recently. He led Torian to one of the crystal-filled niches, indicating a particular stone larger than the others. Unlike the clear or white crystals that illuminated the chamber, this one was deep blue, almost black in its depths. A farseer, Torian guessed, recognizing its similarity to those in the Silent Watchers. Of a sort, Arista confirmed, but attuned specifically to the frame and what it contains. Lord Elrond created it to monitor the binding's stability without risking direct contact. He placed his hands on either side of the crystal, not touching it, but channeling power toward it. The blue stone responded, its depths lightening to reveal swirling patterns similar to those on the frame's surface. We've been tracking the binding's strength, Arista explained as images formed within the crystal, measuring how firmly Morethil remains contained. What we've found is troubling. The crystal showed what appeared to be a map of Tyrina, with points of light marking major settlements and strongholds. Overlaid on this were patterns of shadow not uniform darkness, but tendrils that reached outward from 4 specific locations. The relics, Torian realized. Each one emanates these shadow patterns. Yes, this is the frame's influence. Arista pointed to tendrils spreading from Rivendell's location. And here, the dagger in Shadow Grove, the book in the Silent Watchers, and the box in the Dwarven Halls. Each creates its own pattern of corruption, its own echoes, as your king's seneschal called them. But they're not isolated, Torian observed, studying how the tendrils reached toward each other across the map. They're connecting. Precisely our concern, Arista confirmed grimly. The relics were separated to prevent their combined power from weakening the binding, but their influence continues to spread, creating networks of corruption that may eventually achieve what physical proximity would have done. The implications were staggering. If the relic's influence could connect across vast distances, then separating them physically might prove insufficient. The binding itself could be compromised without the relics ever being brought together again. How long, Torian asked, before these connections become strong enough to threaten the binding? Impossible to say with certainty, Arista admitted. Months, perhaps years. But there's another factor complicating our estimates. He adjusted his focus on the crystal, and the image shifted to show a 5th point of darkness net, emanating from any of the Relics locations. But from somewhere in the far south, this appeared 3 weeks ago. A new source of power that resonates with the Relics, strengthening their influence and accelerating the connections between them. What is it? Torian asked, studying the unfamiliar location. Another relic we don't know about. We don't believe so, Arista replied. Lord Elrond suspects it may be another power altogether on that shares certain qualities with Morathal's essence. A darkness that recognizes and responds to the void magic contained in the relics. Sauron, Torian said, the name falling like a stone into still water. Arista nodded grimly. The possibility cannot be dismissed. Though defeated at the end of the Second Age, his spirit endured, formless but not powerless. If he has begun to regain strength, he might be drawn to the relic's power, Torian finished, seeking to use it to amplify his own recovery, or to free Morathil entirely, Arista suggested. Another lieutenant to serve him in the coming darkness. The crystal's image faded as Arista withdrew his influence, leaving it once again deep blue and opaque. They returned to the edge of the water pool, both contemplating the wider implications of what they had discussed. This changes my mission, Torian said finally. It's not enough to simply check the relic's containment. We need to find a way to suppress their influence, to prevent these connections from forming. Lord Elrond has been researching possibilities, Arista replied. Ancient methods of containment beyond physical barriers. But such knowledge is scarce, and time grows short. The Watcher, Torian said suddenly, remembering the enigmatic figure who had aided them beneath the mountains. He knew more about the relics and their nature than anyone we encountered. If we could find him again, the crossroads is not a place one simply visits, Arista cautioned. It exists between realms, accessible only under specific circumstance to those specifically invited. Then we must create circumstances that warrant an invitation, Torian insisted. The Watcher said he observes the threads of fate. If these connections between the relics truly threaten the binding, surely that qualifies as a significant enough disruption to draw his attention. Arista considered this. Perhaps, but how would we signal him? The paths you traveled before are likely closed or changed. The pendant he gave me, Torian said, touching the crystal that hung dark and dormant at his throat. It contained light from before darkness entered the world, power enough to wound Morathil himself. Though it seems dormant now, it might still hold some connection to its maker. Worth attempting, Arista agreed. But not here, not so close to the frame. Any working involving the Watcher's artifacts might disrupt the chamber's delicate balance. They left the chamber after Torian had completed his inspection of the frame's containment. The silver door sealed behind them, water patterns once again dark and dormant until the next authorized visitor arrived. As they ascended the stairs back to the hidden room, Arista spoke of other defenses. Rivendell had implemented prills expanded to cover wider territories, new wards established at valley approaches, and regular scrying to detect corruption before it could take root near elven settlements. We fight a holding action, he admitted as they emerged into the room with its wall of maps, addressing symptoms while the underlying cause remains beyond our reach. For now, Torian replied. But if we can contact the Watcher, learn more about the relics, nature, and how to suppress their influence, then we might buy time, Arista finished. Time for a more permanent solution to present itself. They spent the remainder of the day reviewing reports from across Tyranair accounts gathered by Rivendell's extensive network of allies and informants. The pattern was consistent. Increased sightings of corrupted creatures, unexplained disappearances, and a general darkening of once peaceful regions. Most concerning were reports from the south, where entire villages had been abandoned, their inhabitants fleeing northward with tales of shadows that consumed rather than merely darkened. That evening, they met with Lord Elrond himself in his private study. The Master of Rivendell greeted Torian with the formal courtesy due a representative of the woodland realm. But his ancient eyes held genuine warmth. "Your journey comes at a critical time," Elrond said once they were seated. "The frame's disturbances have increased in recent weeks, despite our best efforts at containment. Torian has suggested attempting contact with the Watcher," Arista informed him. Using the pendant he was given, Elrond's expression grew thoughtful. "The being you described, Wendell," he named himself. "Yes," Torian confirmed, though he said he had given up that name long ago. "Interesting," Elrond murmured. "That name appears in our oldest records, son, of the Astari, sent to Tyrina in an age past. But the account suggests he departed these shores centuries ago, returning to the west. Could he have remained unknown to the wise?" Arista asked. Perhaps Elrond allowed. The Istari were not bound to reveal themselves or their purposes to any save those they chose. And if this one took up the role of Watcher at the crossroads, he shook his head slightly. "It would explain much about the power you described." "Then you believe contact might be possible?" Torian pressed. "Possible, yes. But not without risk," Elrond cautioned. "The pendant was created for a specific purposetto, counter Morathel's power during your confrontation. Using it to call across the boundaries between realms might have unexpected consequences. What alternative do we have?" Torian asked. "If the relic's influence continues to spread and connect. If this new darkness in the south truly is Sauron stirring." Again, Elrond was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as if seeing beyond the walls of his study to futures yet unrealized. "You are right," he said finally. "The risk of inaction outweighs the risk of the attempt. But it must be done properly, with appropriate safeguards." He rose, moving to a cabinet inlaid with silver and mother-of pearl. From within, he retrieved a small wooden box carved with symbols of protection and containment. This was crafted to hold objects of power, to dampen their influence while they are studied. He explained, opening it to reveal a velvet-lined interior. "Place the pendant inside. It will prevent any unintended effects while we prepare for the ritual." Torian removed the pendant from around his neck, feeling a momentary reluctance as he placed it in the box. Though dormant, it had become something of a talisman to Hema, reminder of their victory against Morathel, of Arathan's sacrifice. "The ritual will require preparation," Elrond continued, closing the box carefully. 3 days, at minimum. We must align with the proper celestial conditions and gather the necessary components. 3 days, Torian repeated, concern evident in his voice, while the corruption continues to spread. 3 days that may save months or years later, Elrond countered gently. Some workings cannot be rushed, especially those that reach beyond the boundaries of our world. Torian nodded, accepting the wisdom in the Elven Lord's words. What can I do to assist in the preparations? Rest, Elrond advised. Recover your strength. You have traveled far and faced much. The ritual will demand all your focus and energy when the time comes. But rest proved elusive for Torian that night. From the balcony of the guest chamber assigned to him, he gazed out over the valley of Imladris, its beauty untouched by the corruption spreading through the wider world. Yet even here, in this haven of peace, the shadow of what was to come hung heavy in the air. His thoughts returned to Arathon, imprisoned within the frame, still fighting a battle that should have ended months ago, and to the connections forming between the relics, reaching across Tyrina like the strands of some vast dark web. Hold on, my friend, he whispered to the night sky. We have not forgotten. We will find a way. Whether Arathon could hear him across the void that separated them, Torian couldn't know. But making the promise aloud strengthened his resolve. Whatever came in the days ahead, whatever risks the ritual to contact the Watcher might entail, would face them without hesitation for Arathon, for the binding that kept Morathil contained, and for a Tyrena increasingly threatened by shadows, both old and new. The stars wheeled overhead, their light a reminder that even in the darkest times, some things remained constant, untouchable by corruption. Torian took comfort in their distant radiance as he prepared himself for what was to come. 3 days until the ritual. 3 days to gather his strength and courage. 3 days before they attempted to reach across the boundaries between worlds to contact a being whose true nature and motives remained a mystery. And beyond that, a continuing journey to check the other relics, to address the echoes of darkness wherever they manifested, and perhaps if the Valar were Kinto, find a way to strengthen the binding that held Morathil and Arathon beyond the reach of this world. A journey without clear end, but one Torian knew he must walk, one step at a time, for as long as necessary. The 3 days of preparation passed with agonizing slowness for Torian, while Elrond and his most trusted advisors gathered the components needed for the ritual to contact the Watcher. Torian found himself relegated to the role of observer's knowledge of the crossroads and its enigmatic guardian valuable. But his skills in the ancient arts of summoning limited compared to the elven lords of Rivendell. He spent much of his time in the Hall of Fire, studying maps and reports of disturbances across the pattern Arister had shown him in the scrying crystal became increasingly clear. Tendrils of corruption spreading from each relic's location, reaching toward one another like the roots of trees seeking water in dry soil. And from the south, that fifth point of darkness growing stronger, its influence accelerating the connections between the relics. On the evening of the 3rd day, Elrond summoned him to a secluded glade high above the valley floor. The location had been chosen with Korea natural amphitheater formed by ancient trees whose massive roots created a series of concentric circles around a central clearing. Stars shone with unusual brightness overhead, their light seeming to pool in the clearing like liquid silver. "The conditions are favorable," Elrond said by way of greeting. He wore formal robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars, and a circlet of mithril rested on his brow. The boundaries between realms thin on certain nights, under certain stars. Tonight is such a night. Arister was already present, along with two other elven lords Torian recognized as members of Elrond's inner council. They had prepared the clearing according to some ancient design, placing white stones in precise patterns and hanging crystal vessels from the lower branches of the surrounding trees. Within each vessel burned a flame of different color: blue, silver, gold, and a strange, shifting hue that seemed to contain all colors and none. "Your pendant," Elrond said, presenting the wooden box they had stored it in. "It will serve as our focus, our connection to the Watcher. But you must be the one to activate it. It was given to you, and it will respond most strongly to your touch." Torian accepted the box, feeling its weightier than it should be, as if the pendant inside somehow added mass beyond its physical form. "What must I do?" "Stand at the center of the clearing," Elrond instructed. "Hold the pendant and focus your thoughts on the Watcher, his appearance, his voice, the crossroads where you encountered him. We will provide the power and structure for the calling, but your memory, your connection, must guide it." As Torian moved to the clearing's center, the other elves took positions at the 4 cardinal points, each standing before one of the colored flames. Elrond remained at the eastern point, where the silver flame cast his features in otherworldly light. "Begin when you are ready," he said. "But be warned, started. The ritual cannot be safely interrupted. Whatever comes, we must see it through to completion." Torian nodded his understanding. He opened the box and removed the pendant, its crystal still dark and dormant against his palm. Closing his eyes, he focused his thoughts on the Watcher's ageless face, the robes of shifting color, the voice that had seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his mind. He remembered the crossroads, that impossible chamber where paths converged across distances both physical and metaphysical. Around him, the elven lords began to chant in ancient Quenya, the form still spoken in Rivendell, but an older dialect that resonated with power. The colored flames brightened in response, their light stretching toward the center of the clearing like reaching fingers. Torian felt the pendant grow warm in his hand, then hot, not painfully so, but with an intensity that suggested awakening power. He opened his eyes to see the crystal glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the elven chant. The ritual's effect became visible as a shimmering in the air above the clearing like heat rising from sun-baked stone, but more structured, forming patterns that corresponded to the white stones placed around the perimeter. The stars overhead seemed to brighten further, their light focusing on the clearing as if through some vast, invisible lens. Torian raised the pendant higher, its glow now bright enough to cast shadows despite the competing light from the colored flames. "Watcher," he called, his voice steady despite the power swirling around him. Guardian of the crossroads, I, Wendell, once of the Istari, we seek your counsel in a time of growing shadow. The pendant flared suddenly, its light expanding outward in a perfect sphere that encompassed the entire clearing. Within that sphere, the air thickened, taking on a golden hue similar to the passage that had led them from the crossroads to the edge of the corrupted lands months before. For a moment, nothing else happened. The elven chant continued, the colored flames stretched toward the center, and the pendant's light held steady. Then, like a ripple spreading across still water, a disturbance formed in the air before Toriona thinning of the boundary between here and elsewhere. You call across boundaries not meant to be crossed, came a voice that, as before, seemed to bypass physical hearing and resonate directly within their minds. With power not meant to be awakened a second time, the Watcher stepped through the disturbance as if through an invisible doorway. He appeared much as Taurian remember, and slender, clad in robes of shifting color, his features ageless, yet somehow ancient. But there was a tension in his bearing now, a wariness that hadn't been present in their previous encounter. "Forgive the intrusion," Elrond said, his voice carrying easily despite the power swirling through the clearing. "But circumstances compel us to seek your wisdom once more." The Watcher's gaze moved from Torian to Elrond, recognition flickering in his eyes. Elrond half-elven, it has been some time since our paths crossed. "You know me?" Elrond asked, surprise evident despite his usual composure. "I have watched the threads of fate weave through this world for longer than you might guess," the Watcher replied. "Your thread has intersected with many others of significance." His attention returned to Torian, including this one, whose choices have created ripples I did not anticipate. "The binding ritual," Torian said. "It worked, but not as we expected. The relics continue to exert influence," the Watcher finished for him, their power reaching across distances, forming connections that threaten to undermine the very binding they were meant to maintain. He sighed, a sound that carried weariness beyond mortal understanding. "I feared as much when I saw the path you chose. You knew this would happen?" Torian asked, a note of accusation creeping into his voice. "I knew it might," the Watcher corrected. "The future is never fixed, only probable. The binding ritual you performed was incomplete by necessity, missing one relic, improvised in haste. Such workings often have unforeseen consequences. Then help us now," Elrond urged. "Guide us toward a solution before these consequences grow beyond our ability to address them." The Watcher moved further into the clearing, the golden light of the ritual sphere seeming to bend around him rather than illuminate him directly. "The solution is not simple, nor without cost. The relics were created as a set, designed to work in concert. Separating them physically was necessary, but insufficient. Their essence remains connected across any distance. We've seen evidence of this," Arista confirmed from his position at the southern point. "Tendrils of influence reaching from one to another, growing stronger with time, and accelerated by another power," the Watcher added, his expression grave. "A darkness stirring in the south, familiar yet changed, ancient yet renewed. Sauron, Elrond said, not a question, but a confirmation of their fears. The Watcher inclined his head slightly. The shadow in the east gathers strength once more. Though still formless, his will reaches out, seeking tools and weapons to hasten his return. The relics represent such a tool power he did not create, but can bend to his purpose. By freeing Morathail, Torian surmised, adding another lieutenant to his forces. That would be merely the beginning, the Watcher warned. The relics contain knowledge and power from an age when the boundaries between worlds were more permeable. In the wrong hands, they could open doors long sealed, allowing entities far worse than Morathail to enter your reality. The implications sent a chill through Torian despite the ritual's ambient heat. How do we prevent this? How do we suppress the relic's influence? The Watcher was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as if seeing possibilities beyond their perception. There are methods, he said finally, ways to contain such artifacts more completely. But they require rare components and knowledge few in this age possess. Name them, Elrond pressed. Whatever is required, we will find it. 3 things, the Watcher replied. First, water from the wells of Ulmo in the undying land's water that has never known corruption or darkness. Elrond's expression tightened. The undying lands are closed to us now, the straight path hidden except to those specifically granted passage. There are exceptions, the Watcher countered. Small amounts of such water were brought to Tyrina long ago, preserved in certain sacred places. One such repository exists in the northern wastes, guarded by ice and ancient spells. The second component, Arista asked. Earth from the foundations of Angband, where Morgoth was first imprisoned. The Watcher continued. Ground that absorbed the power of his binding and still resonates with it. Such earth contains properties that naturally suppress dark magic. Angband was destroyed at the end of the First Age. One of the other elven lords objected. Broken and drowned beneath the sea. Not all of it, the Watcher corrected. Fragments remain, thrust upward when the lands were remade. One such fragment forms an island far to the west, beyond the sight of all but the keenest eyes. And the third, Torian asked, already anticipating that it would be equally difficult to obtain. A flame from the forges of Orla, the Watcher said. Fire that burns without consuming, that purifies without destroying. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm maintained such a flame in their deepest hall, using it to craft their greatest works. Khazad-dûm has been abandoned for centuries, Arista pointed out. The dwarves delved too deep, awakened something in the darkness beneath their halls. The flame endures, the Watcher insisted. Untended but unextinguished, waiting for those with the courage to reclaim it. Silence fell over the clearing as they contemplated the enormity of the task before them. 3 components, each requiring a dangerous journey to places long abandoned or hidden from the world, and time growing short as the relic's influence spread and connected. Even with these components, Elrond said finally, we would need knowledge of how to use them effectively. A ritual of containment powerful enough to suppress relics of such potency. That knowledge I can provide, the Watcher replied. It was, After all, part of my original purpose in coming to these shores to guide and advise in matters beyond mortal understanding. Torian studied the enigmatic figure before them, pieces falling into place. You were sent to Tirana as one of the Istari, he said, to oppose Sauron's return. The Watcher's expression softened slightly. Among other purposes, yes. Though my path diverged from my brethren long ago, I found my calling not in direct opposition to darkness, but in watching, preserving knowledge, maintaining balance where possible. Will you help us now? Torian pressed. Not just with knowledge, but actively. The task you've set before us may be beyond our capabilities alone. My role as Watcher limits my direct intervention, came the careful reply. The balance of powers in this world is delicate, and my actions must be measured accordingly. He paused, seeming to come to some internal decision. But I can guide you to each component, prepare you for what you will face. And when all three are gathered, I will join you for the ritual of containment itself. It wasn't everything they had hoped for, but it was more than Torian had expected. Thank you, he said simply. The Watcher approached him, reaching out to touch the pendant still glowing in Torian's hand. This has served its primary purpose, he said, but it can be repurposed. When you have secured each component, use it to call to Manette through an elaborate ritual like this one, but through focused intent. I will hear, and I will come. The pendant's light changed as he spoke, shifting from pure white to a softer, more complex radiance that contained hints of the four-colored flames surrounding the clearing. Time grows short, the Watcher warned, stepping back toward the disturbance through which he had entered. The connections between the relics strengthened daily. You must secure the first component within a month if there is to be any hope of completing the ritual before the binding weakens beyond recovery. Which should we seek first? Elrond asked. The water from Olmos Wells, the Watcher replied. Journey north, beyond the weather hills, to where the ice bay of Foreshal cuts into the land. There, among the Losath snowmen of the north, you will find one who remembers the old ways, who guards the repository of sacred water. Seek Kaya, daughter of Kaya, last priestess of the ice. With those words, the Watcher stepped back through the disturbance, which sealed behind him like water closing over a stone dropped into its depths. The golden light of the ritual sphere pulsed once more, then faded, leaving only the colored flames and starlight illuminating the clearing. The Elven Lords ended their chant, the sudden silence almost as palpable as the power that had filled the air moments before. Elrond approached Torian, his expression thoughtful. The task he has set before us is formidable, he said. 3 journeys to the most remote and dangerous corners of Tirana, all while the relic's influence continues to spread. We have little choice, Torian replied, looking down at the pendant in his hand. Its light had dimmed but not extinguished, maintaining a soft glow that shifted between the colors of the ritual flames. The binding weakens. Arathan's sacrifice will be in vain if we do not act. Not you alone, Elrond corrected. This burden must be shared. I will send emissaries to the Dwarven kingdoms and to the other Elven realms. If Sauron truly stirs again, If these relics threaten all of Tyrrhena, then all the free peoples must contribute to the solution. The journey north should begin immediately, Arista suggested, joining them at the clearing's center. Winter approaches, and the ice bay will become even more treacherous with the changing season. Elrond nodded agreement. I will send word to the rangers of the north. They know those lands better than any, and some among them may have had dealings with the Lostith in the past. I should go as well, Torian said. The Watcher gave me the pendant and trusted me with this task, and I have seen the relic's power firsthand, know what we face better than most. Agreed, Elrond replied after a moment's consideration. But not alone. Arista will accompany you, along with whichever rangers answer our call, and I will provide what supplies and knowledge we can spare for such a journey. As they left the clearing, the colored flames extinguishing behind them, Torian felt the weight of the task ahead settling upon his shoulders. 3 components, 3 perilous journeys, all while time slipped away and the darkness in the south gathered strength. Yet alongside that weight came a sense of purpose, stronger than any he had felt since the binding ritual. Arathon still fought his lonely battle within the frame, containing Morathil through sheer force of will. The least Torian could do was fight with equal determination here in the world of light and life. For Arathon, he whispered to himself as they descended toward the lights of Rivendell below. For all of Tyrrhena. The pendant pulsed once against his chest, as if in acknowledgement of his resolve. The journey north would begin with the dawn's first step on a path that would take him to the furthest corners of the known world in search of components for a ritual that might save them all, or fail, leaving the relic's influence to spread unchecked, the binding to weaken beyond recovery, and a darkness older than the world itself to find its way back into the realm of light and shadow that was to. The choice had been made. The path lay before him. All that remained was to walk it, one step at a time, wherever it might lead. The preparations for the journey north began before dawn the following day. Elrond had sent messengers riding through the night to locate any rangers of the north who might be in the vicinity of Rivendell. By morning, 2 had arrived weathered men with stern faces and keen eyes who introduced themselves simply as Haleth and Damrod. We know the northern wastes, Haleth confirmed when Elrond explained their destination. Though few venture as far as the ice bay of Foreshall, especially as winter approaches. The Losaths are not easily found by outsiders, Damrod added. They move with the seasons, following game and avoiding the worst storms. Finding this priestess may prove challenging. Yet find her we must, Torian said, before the relic's influence grows too strong to contain. The rangers exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years working together in the wild. Well guide you, Haleth decided, but the journey will be hard, especially for those unused to the bitter cold of the northern reaches. Elrond had anticipated this concern. From Rivendell stores came specialized equipment for Arctic travel, 4-lined cloaks treated with elven oils to repel moisture, boots designed for traversing snow and ice, and tents woven from materials that retained heat while remaining lightweight. These were crafted during the wars of the Second Age, Arister explained as they packed the supplies. When our forces sometimes had to pursue the enemy into the frozen north, they have not been needed for an age, but their enchantments should still hold. By midday, their small company was ready to depart. Torian and Arister would represent the elven realms, while Haleth and Damrod would serve as guides. A fifth member joined them at Elrond's insistence, Linda, who had been guardian to the frame. His sensitivity to the relic's influence will prove valuable, Elrond explained when Torian questioned the addition. He can sense disturbances others might miss, giving warning before corruption takes hold. Their path would take them northwest from Rivendell, through the Troll Shores and across the Weather Hills, then north along the eastern edge of the Eton Moors, before striking directly northward toward the Ice Bay. A journey of several hundred leagues through increasingly wild and dangerous territory. Travel swiftly but cautiously, Elrond advised as they prepared to depart. The lands between here and the Ice Bay grow more perilous with each passing year. Trolls have returned to the Troll Shores, and worse things lurk in the shadows of the Eton Moors. Well, avoid trouble where possible, Haleth promised, and deal with it quickly where not. As they rode out from Rivendell, following the path that would lead them to the ford of Bruinen and beyond, Torian felt the pendant warm against his chest. Its glow had subsided to a barely perceptible shimmer, but its presence remained a comforting connection to the Watcher and a reminder of their purpose. The first days of travel passed without significant incident. They crossed the ford and entered the Troll Shores, a region of dense forest and rocky hills where stone trolls stood as grim, reminders of past encounters between their kind and travelers. The rangers led them along paths few others knew, avoiding the most dangerous areas while maintaining good speed. As they made camp on the third evening, at the edge of a small clearing surrounded by ancient oaks, Lindor approached Torian. The frame's guardian had been mostly silent during their journey, observing more than participating in the occasional conversations that broke the monotony of travel. "Something troubles you," Torian observed, noting the tension in Lindire's normally composed features. "The frame showed your friend again last night," Linda said quietly, "before we departed. I did not mention it earlier, not wishing to burden you unnecessarily." Torian's attention sharpened. "What did you see?" "He appeared more substantial than in previous manifestations," Lindor replied, choosing his words carefully, as if gathering strength or focus. "He spoke, though no sound came through, but I could read his lips." "What did he say?" Torian pressed, setting aside the map he had been studying. "The void is not empty," Lindor quoted. "The same warning Morithel gave during the binding ritual, and then they are coming through." A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air ran through Torian. "Coming through from the void." "So it would seem," Lindor confirmed. "Lord Elrond believes Arathon was trying to warn us. The binding may be weakening faster than we anticipated, allowing something to slip through in places where the relic's influence is strongest." "All the more reason to hurry," Torian said grimly, "to find this priestess and the water from Ulmo's wells." Lindor nodded agreement. There is one more thing. After Arathan's warning, the frame showed a vision, brief but clear. A landscape of ice and snow, a structure built into the side of a glacier, and above it, lights in the sky like curtains of green and blue fire. The northern lights, Damrod said, joining their conversation. The ranger had approached silently, his woodcraft nearly matching that of the elves. The Loths considered them sacred signs from their gods. If your friend showed such a vision, it may be directing us to a specific location. Can you recognize it from Lindire's description? Torian asked. Damrod considered this. Perhaps. There are several glaciers along the ice bay's shore, but one in particular is revered by the Lasathi. Call it Lumiwiti, the Snow Mother. If they were to build a sacred structure, that would be the most likely location. This new information gave their journey added urgency. The following morning, they set out earlier than planned, pushing their mounts harder across the increasingly rugged terrain. They skirted the weather hills, catching glimpses of ancient watchtowers now fallen into ruin remnants of Arna. The northern kingdom of men long since fragmented and diminished. As they traveled further north, the landscape changed. Forests thinned, giving way to rolling moorland covered in heather and gorse. The air grew colder, their breath visible in the early morning and late evening. Game became scarcer, forcing them to rely more heavily on the provisions they had brought from Rivendell. On the seventh day, they encountered their first sign of the corruption spread. A stream that should have run clear and cold was instead sluggish and dark, its surface oily in the afternoon light. Dead fish floated belly up along its banks, and the vegetation nearby had withered or transformed into twisted configurations that mimicked bones and sinew. Like what we found in Shadowgrove, Torian observed, kneeling to examine the corrupted water without touching it. An echo of the Relics' influence. But we're hundreds of leagues from any of the relics, Erister pointed out. How has the corruption spread so far? It follows certain paths, Lindor said, his expression distant, as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. Lay linear channels of natural power that run through the earth. The relic's influence travels along these lines, emerging where they intersect, or where the boundary between worlds is already thin. Can you sense where this particular corruption leads? Haleth asked, hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he scanned their surroundings. Lindor closed his eyes, concentrating. Northeast, he said after a moment, following the stream to its source in the hills ahead. There's something there, focal point, where the corruption has taken stronger hold. They debated briefly whether to investigate or continue on their primary mission. Time was critical, but leaving a manifestation of corruption unchecked could endanger travelers who came after them or spread further while they journeyed north. We should at least determine what we're dealing with, Torian decided. If it's a minor echo, perhaps we can neutralize it quickly. If not, well, mark its location and ensure warning reaches those who might approach it unknowingly. They followed the corrupted stream uphill, leading their horses rather than riding as the terrain grew steeper and more treacherous. The corruption intensified as they neared the source water, turning from oily darkness to something that resembled liquid shadow. Vegetation not merely withered, but actively transformed into grotesque approximations of creatures that had never existed in the natural world. The stream emerged from a cave mouth set into a hillside's mole, and unassuming, but surrounded by signs of corruption that made it impossible to miss. Black ichor seeped from the stone around the entrance, and the air carried that now familiar scent of wet ashes and metal. Similar to what we found in Shadow Grove, Torian told the others. Likely another echo chambera, physical manifestation of the corruption's influence, centered around a heart-like structure that pumps darkness through the surrounding area. How do we destroy it? Damrod asked, knocking an arrow to his bow. In Shadow Grove, we used starglass arrows, Torian replied. But I have none remaining. We'll need another approach. Arista removed a small vial from his pack crystal, containing a liquid that glowed with soft silver light. Water from the Bruinen, he explained. Blessed by Lord Elrond himself. It may not have the power of starglass, but against a minor manifestation, it might suffice. They prepared carefully, distributing what weapons and tools might prove effective against corrupted creatures. The rangers would provide covering fire with arrows treated hastily with what remained of the Aethelus in their healing kits. Torian and Arista would enter the cave to locate and destroy the heart, while Linda remained outside, using his sensitivity to warn of any approaching danger. The cave proved smaller than the one in Shadow Grove, its passages narrow and winding rather than the unnaturally perfect tunnels they had encountered before. They moved cautiously, Arista's crystal vial providing light that pushed back the worst of the corruption clinging to the walls and ceiling. They encountered no corrupted Kreia treasure, hopeful sign that this manifestation was indeed minor, perhaps only recently formed. The heart, when they found it, confirmed this assessment. Unlike the massive organ-like structure in Shadow Grove, this one was smaller, less developed, more like a seed or embryo than a fully formed heart. It pulsed weakly in a small chamber at the cave's end, suspended above a pool of corrupted water that barely covered the chamber floor. Veins of darkness spread from it across the walls, but they were thin and fragile looking, not the robust network they had seen before. A nascent issue, Arista observed, caught early before it could fully establish itself. All the better, Torian replied. It should be easier to destroy. Arista uncorked the vial of blessed water, approaching the pulsing heartseed carefully. With precise movements, he poured the glowing liquid directly onto the corruption's center. The effect was immediate as heartseed convulsed, emitting a high, keening sound that hurt their ears despite its relative weakness. The blessed water sizzled where it touched corrupted flesh, eating through the outer membrane to reach the darkness within. The veins along the walls began to wither and retreat, the corrupted water in the pool clearing gradually as the heartseed's influence faded. Within minutes, the manifestation had collapsed entirely, dissolving into a puddle of rapidly evaporating ichor. That was almost too easy, Torian said, suspicious of their success. Because we caught it early, Arista replied. Had we arrived weeks or months later, it would have been a very different confrontation. They exited the cave to find Lindor and the rangers waiting anxiously. "It's done," Torian informed them. "A minor manifestation, now destroyed. The stream should clear within days." Good Haleth said, relief evident in his weathered features. "But we should move on quickly. There's a storm building to the north, need to reach better shelter before it hits." They continued their journey with renewed urgency, pushing northeast toward the edges of the Etmoors. The land grew wilder, less hospitable, with fewer signs of human habitation. Occasional ruins dotted the landscapements of watchtowers and small settlements abandoned centuries ago when Arnor began its long decline. The storm Haleth had predicted caught them on the 10th day, forcing them to make camp in the lee of a rocky outcropping that provided minimal shelter from the driving sleet and howling wind. They huddled together for warmth, the elven tents proving their worth as they kept out the worst of the elements. "We're making good time despite the weather," Damrod said, as they shared a meager meal of dried meat and whey bread. "Another week should see us to the edges of the ice bay, assuming the storms don't worsen." "They will," Haleth predicted grimly. "This is just the first taste of winter. The further north we go, the harsher it will become." That night, as the others sought what rest they could amid the storm's fury, Torian took first watch. He sat at the tent's entrance, wrapped in his fur-lined cloak, the pendant warm against his chest despite the biting cold. His thoughts turned to Arathan, imprisoned within the frame, still fighting to contain Morathile, while apparently trying to warn them of new dangers emerging from the void. "We're coming," he whispered, though he knew Arathan couldn't hear him across the boundaries between worlds. "Hold on just a little longer." The pendant pulsed once, as if in response to his words or thoughts. Torian touched it through his clothing, drawing comfort from its warmth and the connection it represented not just to the Watcher, but to the greater purpose that drove their journey. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a landscape transformed by a thin layer of snow and ice. They broke camp quickly, eager to make up time lost to the weather. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they skirted the eastern edge of the Etenmorsa region of high, barren hills and deep, shadowed valleys rumored to be home to trolls and worse creatures. They encountered none of these legendary denizens, but signs of their presence were unmistakable bussive footprints in muddy ground. Trees uprooted and discarded like twigs, and once the remains of what might have been a camp of hillmen, destroyed with brutal efficiency. Recent Haleth observed, kneeling to examine the scattered remnants within the past day. "We should move on quickly and quietly." They did so, maintaining silence and vigilance as they traversed the dangerous region. By the 14th day of their journey, they had left the Etenmoors behind, entering the vast open plains that stretched toward the northern wastes. Here the wind blew constantly, cutting through even their elven cloaks with icy precision. Game was scarce, but presentity creatures adapted to the harsh conditions, which the rangers hunted with practiced skill to supplement their dwindling provisions. On the 17th day, they encountered their first sign of the Lasartha hunting camp recently abandoned, with distinctive sleds and tools unlike those used by the peoples of the south. The rangers examined these with interest, noting details that might help them track the nomadic tribe. "They've headed northwest," Damrod concluded after studying the tracks leading away from the camp. "Toward the coast, as we expected. Probably seeking better hunting grounds as winter approaches." "Can we follow their trail?" Torian asked. "For now," Haleth replied, "but if another storm hits, we'll lose it quickly. Snow covers tracks better than any ranger can hide them." They adjusted their course to follow the Losath trail, moving faster now that they had a clear direction. The landscape continued to change around them, trees becoming scarcer, replaced by hardy shrubs, and eventually giving way to tundra covered in moss and lichen. The cold intensified, forcing them to don additional layers from their packs and to make camp earlier each day to ensure proper shelter before nightfall. On the 20th day, they crested a rise and saw before them the ice bay of Ferocala. Vast expanse of dark water bordered by sheets of ice that extended from the shore like frozen fingers reaching for the horizon. The coastline curved in a great arc, forming the bay that had given the region its name. And in the distance, rising from the shore like a mountain of pure white, stood a glacier of immense proportions. Lumiwiti Damrod said with quiet reverence, "The Snow Mother, sacred to the Losath, since before the drowning of New Marl, and likely where we'll find this priestess," Arista added, studying the massive ice formation with keen interest. They made camp that night within sight of the bay, the temperature dropping to levels that would have been dangerous without their specialized equipment. As darkness fell, the sky above them came alive with ribbons of green and blue light, northern lights Damrod had mentioned, dancing across the heavens in patterns of otherworldly beauty. The Losath believe these lights are the spirits of their ancestors. Haleth explained as they watched the celestial display, walking the path between this world and the next. "Perhaps they're not entirely wrong," Linda said softly. "The boundary between worlds is thinner here, near the edge of the known lands. What appears as light to our eyes may indeed be something more." They set out at first light the following morning, following the coastline toward the looming glacier. The going was slow, the ground alternating between rocky shore and treacherous ice that required careful navigation. By midday, they had drawn close enough to see details of the glacier's Fethia sheer wall of ice, hundreds of feet high, with strange formations that might have been natural or might have been carved by intelligent hands. "There," Arista said suddenly, pointing to a section of the glacier's base. "Do you see it?" Torian followed his gesture and spotted what had caught the Rivendell emissary's attention: an opening in the ice. Too regular to be natural, with what appeared to be steps leading upward from the shore to its entrance. Around the opening, symbols had been carved into the isospirals and angular patterns that reminded him vaguely of the unknown writing they had seen in the ancient chamber beneath the mountains. An entrance, he confirmed, but whether to a natural cave or something constructed, I cannot tell from here. As they drew closer, movement caught their attention: figures emerging from the ice entrance, small against the glacier's immensity, but clearly human in form. They wore white furs that blended with their surroundings, making them difficult to track visually as they descended the ice steps toward the shore. Losath, Damrod confirmed. And they've spotted us. Indeed, the white-clad figures had changed direction, moving purposefully toward their small company. They carried spears tipped with what appeared to be bone or ivory, but their posture suggested caution rather than immediate hostility. "Let me speak first," Heleth suggested. "I know a few words of their tongue from previous encounters." The Losath approached to within 50 paces before stopping, forming a semicircle that effectively blocked the path to the glacier. Their leader, distinguished by a headdress of Arctic fox fur and whalebone, stepped forward, calling out in a language none of the company fully understood. Heleth responded with careful pronunciation of what were clearly memorized phrases. The exchange continued briefly before the ranger turned to his companions. "They want to know our purpose," he explained. "I've told them we seek Kaya, daughter of Kaya, on a matter of great importance." They seem surprised by the request. The leader of the Losath spoke again, this time at greater length. Heleth listened intently, occasionally nodding his understanding. "He says Kaya is indeed their priestess," Heleth translated when the man had finished. "But she does not speak with outsiders except at certain times dictated by their traditions. We have arrived during what they call the quiet Muna period, when their holy places are closed to all but the initiated." "Explain that our need is urgent," Torian instructed. "That darkness spreads across the lands to the south, threatening all peoples, including theirs." Heleth did his best to convey this message, though his limited vocabulary made the task challenging. The Losath leader listened, then conferred briefly with his companions before responding. "He says they are aware of the darkness," Heleth reported. "Their hunters have found corrupted animals and tainted waters even this far north. But tradition cannot be broken without proper ceremony and sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" Arista asked. After another exchange, Heleth's expression grew troubled. "They require proof of our worthiness and commitment. A test of some kind, involving, I'm not entirely sure. My vocabulary fails me here. Something about walking between worlds and facing one's shadow." Lindor stepped forward unexpectedly. "I understand," he said. "They speak of a ritual similar to one practiced by the earliest elves before the Great Journey. A vision quest that requires one to confront aspects of oneself normally hidden from conscious awareness." "You know of this?" Torian asked, surprised. "I have studied ancient practices," Linda replied, "including those that fell out of favor as our people turned toward the light of Valinor. This ritual likely predates the sundering of elves and men, preserved here in isolation while forgotten elsewhere." The Losath leader, observing their discussion, spoke again to Heleth. The ranger listened, then turned to the others with a grim expression. "He says one of us must undertake this ritual if we wish to speak with Kaya. It involves drinking a preparation made from plants that grow beneath the ice, then spending a night alone on the glacier. Many do not survive the experience either. The cold claims them, or what they see drives them to madness." "I'll do it," Torian said, without hesitation. "The pendant may offer some protection, and I've faced shadow magic before." "It should be me," Lindor countered. My experience as guardian of the frame has prepared me for confronting darkness within and without." After brief deliberation, they agreed that Torian would undertake the ritual, with Lindor advising him on what to expect and how to maintain his sense of self during the vision quest. The Losath, informed of their decision, seemed satisfied and invited them to follow to a small encampment at the glacier's base. The camp consisted of shelters made from whale bones and animal hides, designed to be easily dismantled and moved as conditions required. Inside the largest of these, they met with tribal elders who explained the ritual in greater detail through a combination of limited, shared vocabulary and expressive gestures. The preparation of tea brewed from phosphorescent fungi that grew in caves beneath the glacier walled open Torian's mind to realities normally hidden from perception. He would then be taken to a sacred place high on the glacier's face, where the boundary between worlds was thinnest. There, alone through the night, he would face whatever came to him from beyond that boundary or from within his own consciousness. "If you survive until dawn with your mind intact," Haleth translated, "you will be deemed worthy to speak with Kaija. If not," he left the alternative unspoken. That evening, as the northern lights danced overhead with increasing intensity, Torian prepared for the ordeal ahead. He removed all but the most essential clothing and equipment. Ritual required vulnerability. The elders had explained a willingness to face the cold and darkness without excessive protection. The pendant, however, he kept. When the Losath Shamana, wizened man with eyes clouded by Adja, questioned this through gestures, Torian explained as best he could that it was a gift from a watcher between worlds. The shaman examined it without touching, then nodded acceptance, apparently recognizing its significance. The tea, when presented, glowed with an eerie blue-green light similar to the fungi from which it was brewed. Its scent was sharp and alien, unlike anything Torian had encountered in his centuries of life. The shaman indicated he should drink it all at once, while focusing his thoughts on his purpose-finding Kaya and securing the water from Olmo's wells. Torian did as instructed, the liquid burning a path down his throat and spreading warmth through his body despite its cool temperature. Almost immediately, his perception began to shift colors, intensifying, sounds becoming both clearer and somehow distant, as if heard through water. The lows fled him from the shelter and up the ice steps toward the glacier's face. The journey seemed both instantaneous and eternal, time losing meaning as the tea's effects strengthened. They arrived at a small cave carved into the ice, its entrance framed by those same spiral symbols they had observed from a distance. Inside, a platform of ice had been shaped into a rough approximation of a bed or altar. The shaman gestured for Torian to lie upon it, then placed a small stone lamp near Bit's flame, protected from the wind but providing minimal heat, more for symbolic light than practical warmth. With gestures and the few words they shared in common, the shaman explained that he would return at dawn, but not before regardless of what sounds might emerge from the cave during the night. Then, with a final gesture that might have been blessing or warning, he departed, leaving Torian alone in the ice cave as darkness fell completely outside. The effects of the tea continued to intensify. The ice walls around him seemed to pulse with light that had no visible source, patterns forming and dissolving like living things. The pendant at his throat grew warmer, its glow strengthening as if in response to the ritual's power, or perhaps in protection against it. Time passed. How much? Torian couldn't tell. The northern lights visible through the cave entrance shifted and danced with increasing complexity, their patterns occasionally resolving into forms that suggested faces or figures before dissolving again into abstract ribbons of color. Then, gradually, Torian became aware he was no longer alone in the cave. A figure stood at the entrance, humanoid but indistinct, as if composed of the same light as the aurora above. It made no sound, but Torian sensed its attention focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, both too loud and too soft simultaneously. The figure did not respond verbally, but took a step forward, its form becoming slightly more defined. Features began to resolve, familiar features that sent a shock of recognition through Torian. It was Arathana, something wearing Arathan's appearance. The ranger's face was gaunt, his eyes holding shadows deeper than mere darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You seek to strengthen the binding," the apparition said. "To prevent what is already happening?" Arathan Torian questioned, uncertain whether he faced his friend or some manifestation created by the ritual tea and his own mind. "Part of him," the figure replied. "Part of what he has become. The binding changes those it contains, Torian. Neither fully himself nor fully Morathile, but something new forged in darkness." Torian sat up on the ice platform, fighting the disorientation caused by the tea. "What do you mean? Is Arathon still fighting? Still containing Morathile?" "Fighting, yes. Containing, barely," the apparition said, its form flickering like a candle in wind. "But the void is not empty, as he warned you. Things wait there, things that find the cracks in reality created by the Relics' influence. They slip through, small fragments at first, but growing stronger as they feed on fear and corruption. The echo chambers we've encountered," Torian realized. "They're not just manifestations of the Relic's power, they're incursions from the void itself. Beachheads," the apparition confirmed. "Footholds from which larger invasions can be launched. And they grow more numerous with each passing day." "Then we must hurry," Torian said. "Find the components for the ritual of containment. Suppress the Relic's influence." "It may already be too late," the apparition warned, its form beginning to shift. Features becoming less like Arathan's and more something else. Something older and colder and infinitely more alien. The darkness in the south grows stronger. It calls to the void, offers alliance with what dwells beyond. A exchange of power for passage. Sauron, Torian whispered. He seeks to use the void creatures as weapons. As they seek to use him, the apparition corrected, its voice deepening. Harmonics entering that reminded Torian uncomfortably of Morathiel's speech during the binding ritual, a temporary alliance of convenience, until one devours the other. The figure had changed completely, now no longer Arathon, but something that only approximated humanoid form, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt the mind to contemplate. Darkness swirled within it like liquid shadow, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of a landscape beyond, a place of twisted geometries and impossible angles that Torian instinctively recognized as the void itself. "What are you?" he demanded, hand moving to the pendant at his throat. "Not Arathan, not even Morathile. I am what waits," the thing replied, its voice now a discordant chorus that set Torian's teeth on edge. "What has always waited since before your world was shaped from chaos. We were the chaos, and we will be again when all returns to darkness." It took another step forward, the temperature in the ice cave dropping precipitously. Frost formed on Torian's skin and clothing, the very air seeming to crystallize around him. "The water you seek will not save you," the void thing said. "The ritual cannot succeed. The binding already fails, and when it does, we will pour through in numbers beyond counting. Your world will become an extension of the void, a new hunting ground for appetites you cannot comprehend." Torian's hand closed around the pendant, which now burned against his palm with the same intensity it had shown during the binding ritual. "If you're so confident of victory," he challenged, "why appear to me at all? Why attempt to discourage what you claim cannot succeed?" The void thing hesitated, its form rippling with what might have been uncertainty. "Caution," it admitted finally. "Your kind has proven resilient in the past, capable of unexpected resistance. We prefer unopposed entry." "Then you fear the ritual might work," Torian pressed, gaining confidence from the creature's admission. "Might strengthen the binding enough to keep you contained." "Fear is not the correct term," the void thing replied, but its form had begun to destabilize further, edges blurring as if it struggled to maintain cohesion in the face of Torian's defiance. "Merely prudent assessment of variables." Torian rose from the ice platform, the pendant's heat spreading through his body, counteracting both the cave's unnatural cold and the disorienting effects of the ritual tea. "You've shown your hand too early," he said. "Revealed your concern before the game has properly begun." The void thing made a sound like tearing fabric, its form collapsing inward before reforming with visible effort. "The game began ages ago," it hissed. "Long before your kind walked upright beneath stars. We are patient. We can wait, but not passively," Torian countered. "Not without attempting to influence events in your favor." This was only the beginning. The relics have awakened, and their story continues in part 3.